So the presentation today is 3 imperatives of software quality that drive digital results. And really what we're looking towards, and many organizations are pursuing when it comes to quality, is continuous quality. But I want to throw out there, of course, that we should include compliance and security, and those are actually part of the definition of quality, which we'll talk a little bit about. So just a quick about myself. So am I qualified to speak to you? I think so. I've been either developing software, architecting software, delivering software, consulting and helping teams at Rational and IBM improve their software delivery and development practices, implemented agile processes at many large-scale organizations. Throughout my career, then I went into product marketing, where I was an SME, spoke at a lot of conferences around ALM, SDLC topics, and then I branched out and did some other things within, again, IT from a marketing and product marketing perspective. So, so software and software delivery has been, central to my entire career. And I'm super passionate about software and the impact it can have on our lives. And it's really come true. I mean, one of my early mentors said something profound that stuck with me, which is that software is the closest man-made thing, right? Manufactured thing to human thought. It's a pretty cool concept, and no, it's no more true today, or no more true then than it is today. In fact, it's more true today. So let's talk about quality in that context. But first, let's talk about what is it that your organization is trying to achieve, right? So there's a lot of talk about, digital transformation, about accelerating digital business, et cetera. So I kind of want to just start and say, hey, likely you all have initiatives, digital initiatives of various sorts. They may have different, and goals. It may involve different technology, but let's just spend a little bit of time sort of level setting on that topic. So one thing I found really interesting is that Gartner does some different surveys, and one of their surveys is around CIOs. And this year, of course, they'd be remiss by not talking about the pandemic in some way, shape, or form and what's changed. And so what we found is that this isn't just Gartner, but others, that the demand for digital products and innovation is actually accelerating, right? So if anything, the pandemic has been a catalyst for digital transformation. I think it's refocused some companies in specific areas. So for instance, we'll talk a little bit about, customer engagement and how they interact, and whether you're B2C or B2B, right? Could be interesting, but technology leaders like yourselves are definitely under increasing pressure, right, to deliver. And not only better digital experiences, but at ever increasing quality and pace. And so most organizations have been pursuing some form of continuous software delivery for some time, but it's clear, right, that software specifically and the continuous delivery of software is on this critical path to digital transformation. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. So what are we talking about when we say, driving business results or accelerating business results? And so there's a couple areas that I want to focus in on, because these are semi-obvious, but I think it's good to just kind of, again, level set. So I have a picture here of Whole Foods, right, an app. And there's something really interesting. It's kind of personal, because my son went to work for Whole Foods starting last summer, right in the middle of the pandemic. A new Whole Foods was going to open in a nearby town at Castle Rock, and right in the middle of the pandemic, when really, stores were limiting, right, and obviously they're an essential business, but they decided not to open to the public. They decided to go completely digital and do only home delivery, which is really interesting. And so they relied on technology significantly, and the experience they provided was pretty phenomenal. From the end users, so the customer perspective, to get status on their order, to the people in store receiving that order. My son was a personal shopper, so he had to interact with this technology, and it was pretty cool. He explained to me, showed me how that worked. and how they would get it all right, that order. And he was super efficient in gathering those groceries. And then there was a handoff point in which somebody else would check it. It went into bags and it was all categorized. And then you had the delivery people, and they had a checkpoint on how they would deliver this stuff. And they had the technology as well. And then finally back over to the customer, that the customer could then say, hey, I didn't get this, or I didn't get this. And it was all done via digital. And so that was just a really interesting example. And so, number one, I'd say clearly there's a huge focus on engagement, right? And the data backs it up. Gartner's data backs it up. Customer engagement, right, has increased significantly in certain areas. So the use of digital channels to reach customers, okay, or citizens, it's actually about the same, or it's actually declined slightly, interestingly enough, in the light blue for 2021. But the use of self-services, self-service, right? This would be an example of self-service, increased significantly. Demand for new digital products and services, huge increase, or pretty significant increase, right? And then even more significant increase in the degree of customer engagement versus transactional and relationships. And so I think there's no question that this is super important. That customer engagement is important, customer experience. But at the same time, right, there is no security threats have not relented, and so cybersecurity is still a prominent item in the CIO agenda. And in fact, both customer experience or engagement and cybersecurity, and I'll throw in compliance there, are top 3 items most typically for CIOs and organizations, which again trickles down to obviously the app dev group. So let's get into, the title is 3 imperatives. Let's talk about imperative number 1. So number 1, I'm going to challenge you to sort of rethink your definition of quality. If you did any research on Parasoft, right, we're an automated software testing tools company. And so maybe you were thinking this is all going to be about tools. So sorry to disappoint you. Yes, we'll touch on tools. But really what I like to talk about more is kind of taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, and think about, how do you define quality? And what are those ingredients sort of to quality? And so the first thing I'm going to say is likely your definition is partially wrong. I don't know all of you. I can't predict, but traditional testing approaches will not, I repeat, will not deliver the results that you're trying to achieve from a digital perspective. It's just not going to happen, right? Here's a quote from Gartner. Test automation focused only on GUI tests fails to produce compelling value. It's expensive, right, to build. It's slow to execute and fragile to maintain. That sounds like a triple whammy, right? Which is why there's a frowny face there, right? Because I think most organizations, when they think of testing and quality, this is what they think of, right? This is where they probably invested, or they're thinking about investing from an automation perspective. And I think the problem is it's just not going to produce the results. And so that's why I want to challenge you to step back and think not just about testing, but about quality. So how do we define quality? How do you define quality? So there's 3 areas that I want to talk about briefly. One is customer experience. We touched on this, right? So this should be part of your definition of quality. Now, how do you test it? It's interesting. Well, first of all, part of customer experience is related to availability on the right platform. So omni-channel, a multi-channel. It has to do with performance, right? Is it performant? It obviously has to do with usability, right? So not just user interface and user experience, but I'm talking about the bigger customer experience and engagement over time, right? So this goes back to requirements. So if you think about testing, you think about quality, how do you know if you've achieved the right level of quality? Well, you basically verify and validate. So verification, validation against requirements. So you have to look at and think about, what are my requirements? What level of customer experience engagement do I want to achieve? And how would I measure that? And those ones are maybe a little more difficult to automate. Some of it's not. Some you can automate. Some is harder to automate. But I'm going to be remiss, right, about if we don't think about that bigger picture. The second one is security and compliance. There's a lot of things you can do right here, and there's a lot of emerging areas that I think people haven't looked at or invested in when it comes to security and compliance. And sometimes it sort of crosses over from, strictly app dev into the security architects or the CISO. But these have to come together, because if you don't bake in quality from the beginning, again, testing, what does testing do? It simply what exposes the level of quality. It doesn't actually create quality. It just simply exposes the level of quality you've already built. And so security and compliance needs to be baked in from the beginning as well. And there's a lot of interesting ways in which that can be done. We'll talk more about that. And then business value. Finally, customer experience, yeah, that's pretty close to business value. But at the end of the day, most of you, if not all of you, are in business to make a profit. Some of you might be at nonprofits. Even then, there's probably some exchange. You're providing value and getting something back in exchange for that value you're providing. And so how do we measure that? And we just should never take our eyes off that prize, so to speak, that we need to deliver these systems. Unless they're in production, right? The software is in use, it is not providing value. That means if we have a minimum bar to achieve from quality, then we better figure out how to do that quickly and efficiently. And by the way, right, not compromise that experience or engagement, because you can't get it back. If you make a big error or a big mistake, a lot of times it's really hard to sort of get that experience back and build on that brand experience for your customers. So these are some key things you should think about in terms of how you define quality and how you're going to measure these items. And testing is one way in which you can do that. So at this point, let's do a quick poll. I just want to get a feel for how well you've all defined quality. So I'm going to hit start poll. So right now, I'm going to take a few seconds here, 30 seconds maybe, for you to go ahead and fill this in. You all should see a place from which you can fill in the poll. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay. I'm going to wait a little while because I want to make sure we get some respondents here for this poll. So go ahead and select. Do you have a well-defined definition of quality? It's yes, sort of, or no, not really. And you can look at those a little bit more there in those definitions. So BrightTalk is instructing me I need to keep this poll open for about another 18 seconds, 17, 16, before we can gather the results. So go ahead and fill those in. If you haven't yet, please select the items and then select the item that's best defines yours. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So it looks like from the people that responded thus far anyway, that we have an interesting mix. Nobody said not really. The majority of you, oops, I'm still getting results in, I guess. Still calculating results. So yeah, so it's kind of an interesting, it's about an even split between yes and not really. Oh, sorry, nope, skewing to not really. So I think, based on this, let's come back to these poll results because I don't know how long it takes for them to sort of calculate. So, all right, so let's go back to slides. And let's get into imperative number 2. So imperative number 2 is pursue continuous quality. So I mentioned at the beginning, so again, the first one is get the right definition of quality, maybe expand your definition of quality and define how you're going to measure quality. Number 2 is you need to pursue continuous quality. So Gartner puts out a top 10 DevOps trends chart, and there's data on this. And I think some of this is publicly available, even if you're not a customer. And notice that they break it into categories. And category number 1 is product. And number 3 on that list is actually specifically continuous quality. So it is a top 10 trend in DevOps that impacts DevOps specifically. But if you look at the last category, reliability, security, and compliance, right? sounds a lot like things that directly affect the way in which a customer and or the company would sort of define or be very closely related in quality, right? That definition of quality, that broader definition. And specifically, these are things that we can indeed, right, verify and validate as we're building software and delivering that. And so so really quality is pretty significant chunk of these top 10 DevOps trends. And specifically, right, nodding towards this concept of continuous quality. So we're going to talk more about that as we go. From another Gartner report, it says most of the application organizations Gartner encounters have sub-optimized development teams and tend to underinvest in modern quality practices, which causes havoc downstream for users. And so what they're basically saying is the current state is an underinvestment in modern quality practices. And the future state that you need to be chasing and pursuing, right, is continuous quality practices. And oh, by the way, it's probably not a destination that you're going to get to anytime soon. It's more like a journey, kind of like digital transformation. I mean, when are you really done? Probably never, right? So continuous quality sort of comes alongside there and says, okay, this is going to be something you need to pursue immediately. You need to pursue ardently, but you're probably going to have to continue to pursue. So it's really about a journey. So the question is, how do you pursue it? How do you get started? How do you continue to improve? What does that look like? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this, I would suggest Forrester can give you some more insights. Specifically, there's this tech tide that they just put out called continuous software delivery. And notice it's continuous software delivery. It's not about testing and quality. That's not the main focus. It's not continuous quality report. It's a continuous software delivery report. So look at key takeaway number 1. Testing tools must be a key area for investment to achieve continuous delivery. The need to test software earlier, more often, and more rigorously has fueled a burgeoning group of testing technologies as firms continue to break down apps into microservices and increase speed, right? They need to focus on testing APIs and automate testing wherever possible, okay? So if you really kind of want a definition for continuous quality, that's starting to define it, right? Especially from a testing tool perspective about what that looks like. And so maybe it's more continuous testing. And in fact, Forrester coined the term continuous testing a few years ago. And so I think this report, again, I would highly recommend if you can get it, because there's some really, really good stuff in there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it upcoming. So let's just kind of level set. What does this mean, testing earlier, and why would we want to test earlier? And again, this, honestly, many of you have probably seen this data before. It's been around for literally decades, and it hasn't changed that much. So there's this concept of shifting left, right, to detect and remediate defects earlier. And there's a really significant impact. So it turns out that defects are injected or introduced, right, during coding, most of them. There are some defects introduced later for various reasons, but 85% of all defects in software delivery, right, it happens during the coding of software. So why do we leave the testing, the finding of the defects to late in the cycle? So where do we find them? We find them maybe a little bit of unit testing. Some of you are getting a little more into unit testing. Maybe I think you should take it more seriously. But we're not finding a whole lot during coding. Developers, I was a developer, they don't like testing. They probably have completely the wrong mindset, right? They should have a quality and testing mindset. Everybody owns quality, and that's called cultural. But the reality is they probably don't have as much. I didn't. I know. I was guilty of this as well. And so we find them during unit testing, functional tests, system tests. But the problem, as you know, is right. How expensive is it to fix those defects? Well, it goes up. and it goes up exponentially, because if you don't find defects until you release something in production, right, that cost to fix it goes up significantly. So the baseline would be fixing it during coding, the developer finding their own defect. And of course, developers do find their own defects, and it's just not reported on. So this is probably a little bit skewed in the sense that they do find defects. Just while you're coding, you find your own issues. You do test to some degree because you want to see the results, at least the thing running. But do you test all the corner cases, and do you test the boundary conditions, and do you test all those other things? And probably the answer is generally no. And so that's why this looks like this. So if we can shift left, right, huge value, because guess what? We find defects much earlier in the life cycle, which drives down the number of defects actually that escape, if you will, that we introduce beyond the coding phase. And as a result, obviously the cost is going to go down significantly. And so we really need to think about, testing being continually happening throughout the entire CI/CD, continuous delivery process. And a lot of people show this because this is just this infinite loop of continuous integration and continuous delivery of software. And so we have to ensure quality at speed. And in order to do that, we have to take a continuous mindset, right, of testing throughout. So what does that look like? Well, this is what it should look like. It should look something like this. And this test pyramid's been used, again, for quite some time. And Gartner and Forrester and others, they didn't invent it, but they basically reference it significantly. And so it starts with, a lot of times, unit testing and API tests. So this is probably, for most of you or many of you, maybe not where you started your automation process and where you focused your testing and quality. But this is where the most effort and the most tests need to happen, in the unit testing and API testing. And therefore we're going to find these defects earlier. And then, later on, we can't completely ignore UI testing by any means, right? There's definitely some, complex scenarios that we do need to test from a UI perspective, kind of end-to-end perspective. And it is important. But what does that look like for most organizations? Well, it doesn't look like this. And oh, by the way, don't forget about, right, code analysis. So static code analysis is super important. And actually, this is where there's some huge advancements from security, compliance, reliability. You can actually automatically inspect code. Why not when a developer commits their code? We'll talk more about it. Why not use some automation here to improve your code quality based upon certain coding standards? It seems kind of like a no-brainer once you kind of see how it works, to me. But a lot of organizations, they don't focus here, or they have very, very rudimentary tools in this area. And then, they might look at code coverage, but they probably do it for the wrong reasons. And then API tests are very underrepresented. At least automated API testing is very underrepresented in most organizations. Yet most organizations have a microservice, architecture. They're moving to these microservice architectures, which is, by the way, how modern software is delivered in most instances. In which case, guess what? It's kind of driven by APIs, right? So service virtualization and API testing needs to be done. So, but this is what it looks like for most organizations. They focus on what? Manual end user testing, kind of at the end, kind of scenarios. They might inject some automated testing, UI testing, and then they spend very little time on API unit testing or code analysis. And it shows, right? It shows in how quickly, how many defects they find, how much they invest, how quickly they can. I mean, you have a choice. If you have to release your software, are you going to change the bar? Are you going to lower the bar for quality to get your software out? Or are you going to do a hardening sprint in which you do more testing? And a hardening sprint is what? Banging on it in some way, shape, or form. And then you got to do that again manually the next time around, and hope you actually, kind of hope and pray you actually, did the right, we're comprehensive in your validation verification. Reality is that's not a really very, very good strategic approach. So continuous quality is super important. We need to think about our testing much more broadly. And then imperative number 3, right? These two go together closely, but they are not the same thing. I want to suggest, right? So So taking a different approach and from a process perspective and thinking about how you are going to pursue continuous quality is a little different than this, which is now automate, right? Automate everything and every, basically you have to do this. Why do you have to do this? Well, because, right, the whole notion of CI/CD and DevOps has radically changed, and automation has been and is a key ingredient. And I know most of you probably aren't where you want to be yet in terms of automating, right, that continuous integration and delivery process and DevOps process. You could go a lot further. But what does that mean? Are you thinking about the automation of testing and quality throughout the life cycle at the same time as your build and release cycle? Are you just trying to get the software into some testers' hands quicker so they can try to bang on it and then slow down, become a bottleneck, or miss items, right? That's not a good scenario. So Forrester recommends, and in that same report, it's really interesting. They have areas of investment, areas to maintain, and then they have a couple other areas that I'm not representing here. And you should check out the full report, of course. But why? The areas they're recommending invest is dominated by test automation. Why? It's because of what we just talked about. Because most organizations aren't there. You're probably not there. You've underinvested in modern testing practices. And so there's a whole bunch of different technologies that come into play. They call them out individually here. API test automation. Can you execute your application and effectively using AI and machine learning? Can you record, just exercising the GUI, can you record a set of API tests that you can then modify and replay, if you will? Do you have that technology in place? If you don't, and you have APIs and you're building microservices, you should. And then very quickly, right? What about service virtualization, right? So that's number 3 there on this list. If you have this microservices, a lot of times one service or 2 services or 3 services that you are relying on in your application, right? Those aren't available when you're building your app, right? And so you need to simulate that environment. You need to virtualize it. And how quickly can you use modern automation practices that use, various forms of AI, machine learning, et cetera, like smart environment creation to basically accelerate and create a completely virtual environment, test environment, so that you can build robust applications rapidly and actually exercise them such that you can do full API testing, you can virtualize your services, and so forth. And then, of course, there's this whole category of continuous functional test automation suites. Very, very important. It's an invest. You should invest now. And then shift left performance testing and automation. And by the way, this can many times go with API testing, because if you do your API testing right, you actually can, a lot of times you can do some really interesting performance load testing through APIs, a lot easier than the GUI. And so there's some interesting things that those kind of work together. All right, and then in the maintain category, right, there's code quality scanning, so that's static analysis or code scanning. And unit testing, which we already talked about, meaning these are already fairly mature technologies, but I really don't think they're highly invested. I mean, people say maintain. I don't know. I kind of wonder in the enterprise how invested people are in these. I think you hear more about unit testing maybe with JUnit and so forth, but then you do maybe static analysis of code. But there's some super cool things that you can do. So with that, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about, okay, so how do you implement? Those are some areas you should invest in, but how do you get started? So Gartner, again, 4 essential steps to implementing test automation, and I'm not gonna go through their paper in detail, but I will give you a couple of highlights, which is, manual testing obviously can't keep up. We already talked about this. The DevOps tool chain is highly automated, and this drives a critical need for test automation. And there's a lot of benefits to automating your tests. And they go on to talk about a bunch of other things in that paper about the types of tests and so forth, and kind of an approach to implementing test automation. Again, I highly recommend you go check it out. But shorter delivery times, kind of obvious, freeing up resources, that maybe we're doing manual testing, or maybe in that hardening sprint that you can now avoid. Value-added activity, right? Innovating, quicker, more time, more resources for innovation, reduce manual errors, reduce testing costs for long-lived apps, especially. And so, what does this look like? Well, I find it really interesting that most CI/CD pipelines look like this: plan, code, build, test. Test is still this step right here, and it really annoys the crap out of me, if you can't tell, from our entire discussion. If this is all about continuous, then there should be a CQ or a CT on the end of this, which is continuous quality, continuous testing. We should never talk about CI/CD independent of the quality you're trying to deliver. And put testing in some kind of box, right? That's like, oh, somebody else is responsible for that. That's not my job. I code, man. I code and then build it, and then somebody else can do that. That is a wrong mindset. Was what's got us kind of where we are, I think, as a state of quality and continuous testing and automation. And so, what should it look like? Well, we should inject code analysis early, security, reliability, compliance. There's a whole gamut of testing and code analysis that you can do here. There's OWASP, and there's an API OWASP top 10 that we're soon going to be releasing in our code analysis, static analysis tools. Security of other types of security testing. There's all sorts. If you're in the embedded world, right? We can look at AutoSAR requirements. We can look at MISRA. We can look at a bunch of different coding standards and just check and say, hey, does this code meet that's those standards? Yes or no? It's kind of it's pretty cut and dry for the most part. You can choose which rules you implement, which standards you want to go after. And there's hundreds available, and it can happen upon check-in, kind of automatically as code is committed or checked in. Right, it sort of happens automatically right in the IDE. Which is super cool. And then we move to unit testing, test-driven development and unit testing. Absolutely can be highly automated. We can generate, if you have a good set of tools, you can generate these significant amount of your code coverage from a unit testing perspective automatically for you. API testing, UI testing. So I wouldn't put those two together specifically, but yes, we want to do both. Clearly, but API testing is something most organizations, I think, leave out. There's a huge amount of value in automated API testing. And again, you can generate or record those API tests and then replay them in some really interesting ways. You can use it for load testing as well. And then there's, obviously non-functional load testing, performance testing, et cetera. We need to do that as well. And so really, we should think about this as a better approach to your CI/CD, CQ, process, workflow, pipeline. All right, so I'm going to conclude, and actually I'm going to do a couple more. I do have a couple more polls, so let's just jump to the polls and do a couple polls before I actually complete. So one, how would you characterize your plan to pursue continuous quality? So let's do this. Let's start this poll. So I'll just read it out because we got some time to kill here. They want me to keep this open for a minute. How would you characterize your plan to pursue continuous quality? A, you're mature. You've been doing this. You've been working on it for over a year, right? You're pursuing continuous quality. You've got a plan. Two, your basic maturity level. You've got a plan, but you're not really mature. You've just kind of started, and maybe now maybe I've upset the apple cart a little bit. You need to revisit your plan a little bit, but at least you've done something. Or you're immature. We don't really have a plan. Maybe that's why you're attending this webinar right now, is that you need to get a plan together and get started. So go ahead and select one of these. Again, we're going to leave it open for about another 10 seconds or so. So some of you are mature. That's good. That's awesome. My guess is, based upon the first poll question, that's not really true. So it's pretty much an even split right now between mature, basic maturity, and immature. So about a third of you in each category. So that's very interesting. Okay, that's actually kind of what I probably would have thought. I'm actually glad, because I thought for a while there I was thinking, I wonder if people are going to skew to immature, and this could be maybe this is depressing for people. I don't want to depress people. You can do this. Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to go ahead and do. Let me cover a couple of these points, and then we'll do one more poll. So one, right? What do you need to do? You need to spend some time defining what quality means to your organization in the context of software delivery, in the context of delivering digital value, right? Security, compliance, customer engagement. These are all critical aspects to how you define quality. And then if you're going to define quality, you need to understand how are you going to measure it, right? How are you going to measure that? Number two, right? You need to create a plan to pursue continuous quality, and then you need to revisit it. I think quarterly is a good time frame of creating and revisiting. Figure out, okay, which organizations within your software development organization, or which teams, et cetera, or where are they? They might be at different levels because you have different types of software, different services you're providing, et cetera. But, create a plan to pursue it, and pursue it relentlessly, update it quarterly, okay? And then number three is automate your quality practices, your testing across that CI/CD pipeline. Think about it as CI/CD, CT, or CQ for continuous testing, continuous quality. It better be integrated. It has to be integrated not only to the tools you use. These things should happen automatically. You should have dashboards that show you automatically, that immediately makes it super simple to remediate those defects. Or, it comes back to the right people, whether it's developers, et cetera. That's really, really important. Okay, so let's go back to, let's do one more poll then on that topic. So where are you on your test automation journey? So where are you? Manual testing only. Okay, so that's fine. You're manual testing. That means it's low hanging fruit, man. You got lots to do, but it's easy to get started. There's a lot of things you could get started on. Two, you're beginner, right? You've got one type of testing, maybe somewhat automated. Likely it's some UI testing, maybe automation. You're intermediate. You've got a couple areas, between UI testing, API testing, unit testing, static analysis, right? You've got a couple areas. And then advanced would be, hey, we're doing pretty well, man. We've got 3 or more areas well automated across that continuum. So, all right. So I'm going to look. And by the way, don't forget to ask questions in the Q&A area. That'd be great. To add those questions in. So I'm going to leave this poll open just for a little bit longer. And then we'll get back to the final summary and kind of closing this out and getting to Q&A. So, okay. Let's go back to the poll. And let's go ahead and end this poll. So in this case, most of you there's some that are manual, some that are intermediate, but it's mostly intermediate, right? A couple areas that you've already started some automation on. So if that's where this poll stays, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, yep, it seems this whole, oh, no, it's shifting a little bit. So kind of distributed, but again, probably intermediate. Nobody in the advanced category, which is kind of what I probably would have suspected maybe. But more in the intermediate. I actually thought it might be shifted more to manual or beginner. So that's good. That part's good. Cool. Okay, so there's one bonus item here. So, and actually, I think Gartner touches on this as well. But the bonus item here is that continuous testing is recommended, that you pursue a continuous testing suite of products, or a platform or suite, a single vendor that provides multiple areas or facets versus pure best of breed. And I'm not going to go into all the details, right? So they have good reason to back that up. And you can check out the wave. In fact, you can check it out right here. So there's a QR code. I think it's also one of the attachments you can download or get to. But we actually have the Forrester Wave for continuous functional test automation suites available to you. Highly recommend you check that out. I referenced a few other reports that you can check out from Forrester and Gartner as well. In addition, we have some other webinars that would cover some of these areas in a little bit more detail. Some are on demand. In fact, one listed here is on demand as well. So with that, let's get to the Q&A. So the first question is a softball, right? So this one's kind of pretty basic question. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because, as you notice, I haven't talked about Parasoft tools here. This isn't a commercial for Parasoft, but it's, hey, I'm not familiar with Parasoft. Can you give me a quick overview of what testing tools you offer? So as you know, you might expect, right? We don't offer a single tool. We offer a spectrum of tools. So we have static analysis tools, unit testing tools. In fact, it's a kind of a really cool unified environment. So C, C++ test, Java, JTest, .test, and we also have API testing tool called SoTest. We do have a service virtualization tool called Virtualize, and then we have a UI Selenium-based UI tool as well called Selenic that adds on to that really cool Selenium framework and adds more value, more automation. And then we also have a product called DTP, which is really cool, which gives you then reporting and dashboarding across all of those. So for instance, we have dashboards already out of the box for like OWASP as an example and others. So when you put this all together, we pull the data from all these tools and we can display it in cool dashboards in interesting ways. So not too late to ask a question, guys. If you have a question, please go ahead and enter it. I'm going to spend a couple more minutes here, answer another question or two. So another question is, how do I get started adding automation to my CI/CD pipeline? So look, the easy answer is we have other demos and webinars, but specifically there's one coming, which is quality at speed. We're going to cover that's a good one. We'll get a little more detail there. And then there's another one is how to leverage test automation to deliver on your business and quality goals. This one listed on the slide I'm showing right now. It's a fantastic resource for you for that. There's a couple questions here actually that relate back to ROI. So I'm just going to kind of summarize. So there's a big ROI, right? I showed the curve. We have some tools. We have a couple of blogs on this topic, and we actually could engage with you. But we have examples like Caesars Entertainment, right? We have a case study which kind of goes through their ROI journey. And in fact, not only do we have a case study on Caesars, on Alaska, on some others, but we did a summit last fall where they all spoke. We spoke less, Parasoft spoke less than 5 minutes. It was all customers. So Sabre and Caesars and Alaska Airlines and ING were examples. And that's still on demand. It's still available on demand. And there's really, really, really good some ROI stuff in there, but how do our customers? So instead of me answering it as a vendor, you should see how our customers answer that question. Very, very powerful stuff. So check that out for more there. So I think this is a comment. It's, if debugging is the process of removing software bugs, then programming must be the process of putting them in, thus bug injected in code phase. Yes, that's true. So that, and why is that? Well, because we're human, right? So today, there's some AI and ML that generate code or write code, and that there's some good reasons. I mean, there's been big proponents of code generation for many years. So I used to teach an object-oriented analysis design class that was then coupled with a UML class many years ago. And I taught that many, many, many times. But even back then, you could generate some pretty cool code. Now, what's interesting is it didn't, a lot of the kind of between the curly braces stuff, which is, where a lot of the goodness sort of happens. You know, we didn't generate a lot of that code back then. Now you can do even more, right? There's also low code environments. There's a bunch of cool environments that probably inject less bugs if you do that. But again, there's no substitute for then, you know, I do a save, I do a check-in, whatever, boom, static analysis happens, kind of checks the code. Hey, do we violate a bunch of any rules around security, compliance, et cetera? Things that developers, especially entry-level developers, wouldn't necessarily think about or find. Even if they wrote their own tests, they may or may not. So yeah, so I think some of that stuff's kind of no-brainer. So all right, so thank you so much. With that, I'm going to close out. Appreciate your time. Again, maybe you watch this live, maybe you're watching this on demand. If you got to this point, congratulations. You sat through almost about 47 minutes of content. Hopefully you found it useful. Check us out. Here's a bunch of ways in which you can check out Parasoft, right? On social media, other platforms. Come to our website. Check out some of those other resources that you can that are attached here, that you can download. Contact us at any time if you're interested in a trial, a demo. So we'd love to hear from you and help you on your journey to automating across your continuous quality process. So thanks. Have a good day.